I'm going to talk briefly about corruption in sport, in essence about the scope of the problem and how to stop it. After listening to the strategic insights and indeed the hopeful heights of ICSS President Mohammed Hansab and also to the enigmatic Tokyo Sexwale, what I now bring to you will only be cold, hard and troublesome facts. Today, international sport governing bodies are just too often and just too easily corrupted by extravagant greed, criminal fraud and profligate waste. And they are corrupted by greed, fraud and waste because they are, quite frankly, immature organisations. It is a fact that most international sport governing bodies still act like the old boys clubs they started out as. I must stress I'm talking about governance responsibilities here. Many of these immature organisations have evolved and kept modern pace in business, but absolutely not in governance. And where financial liquidity has followed business success, by keeping their governance in a time warp, they have created, perhaps unintentionally, a poisonous culture of permissiveness and entitlement. This is the very cultural poison that international corporations had forced out of them by governments decades ago, through the use of regulation and supervision, based primarily on a concept of global corporate good citizenship. So let me specifically address the elephant in this room, really the elephant in sport, FIFA. Some FIFA officials took tens of millions of dollars in bribes. They rigged media contracts. They lined their own pockets with funds that were supposed to be used to develop football. And just last week, Sepp Blatter, the suspended president of FIFA, admitted that the decision to give Russia the 2018 World Cup was preordained, meaning the entire selection process was likely a sham. For years, FIFA was a disaster. Up until this year, FIFA was considered what the US defence specialists call a zombie program. That is, it is costly, ineffectual in its core purpose, in this case governance, and seemingly impossible to kill. That was until the FBI and the Federal Attorney General decided this year that the USA had some jurisdiction and took serious action in Zurich in partnership with Swiss authorities. And now the Swiss are also serious. After decades of fence-sitting, they are joining in a spree of police and regulator action against FIFA. The FIFA zombie has proved in fact to be mortal. All the international enforcement action exposing it as mortal is enormously welcome. It reminds us all that even absolute power, when abused, can be brought to its knees. It has been said that FIFA is being vicariously blamed for the integrity failures of soccer people out of their control. But as it is clearly a problem of culture, and as FIFA is the head of that culture, so it must be blamed and be correctly blamed. So yes, we must give FIFA the blame it deserves. But as we think about the future, we should not just look for organisation-specific solutions, but rather sport-wide solutions. Because FIFA is the rule, not the exception. And while permissiveness and entitlement have taken FIFA to the brink today, many other sports exhibit similar form and similar behaviour. In fact, there has been a massive failure of integrity across the board in sport governance. But still, believe it or not, corruption in sport administration is not the major integrity problem confronting sport today. Bigger than corruption, bigger than doping, both of which are big enough, critical enough, and potentially disastrous enough of themselves. But bigger than these is the infiltration of organised crime into sport to fix matches and to manipulate competitions. Because the first goes to the heart of structures created to join up common interests into the administration, whereas the second goes to the very heart of sport itself, bringing distrust into the field of play. Organisations can always be rebuilt, but to rebuild trust in the sport itself is far more difficult. Ask baseball, ask boxing, ask sumo wrestling. Transnational organised crime, ladies and gentlemen, is the biggest threat to all sports today. And the gravity of this is being drowned out in a media-driven bloodlust surrounding internal corruption and doping, surrounding principally FIFA in soccer and the IAAF in athletics. But sport itself can only do so much. Governments need to take a bigger role in match-fixing investigations. They need to audit players, referees and leagues. They need to dedicate resources to investigations. Corruption in the field of play is mostly inspired and funded by betting fraud. Betting fraud is in the massive legal and illegal global sport betting markets that transact up to $2 trillion annually around the world. $2 trillion annually. A sport betting market that is many times fiscally larger than sport itself. And sport betting is even more seriously vulnerable than sport itself to corruption. These past few years we have seen clubs and even entire minor leagues co-opted by organised crime to manipulate results in betting. We have seen so-called ghost matches. In some ways, ghost matches are the criminal equivalent of fantasy sports. We have seen fake matches, referees and umpires corrupted and intimidated, players and athletes brought and sold by criminals. As in these examples, sport has palpably failed to cope by itself. But forcing sport gamblers into the hands of criminals by banning this remarkably popular pastime globally, sport betting, is just so counterproductive. We know money laundering, criminal and even terrorist financing finds weaknesses in black and unregulated markets. Pinnacle Sports, likely the biggest sport betting outfit trawling the USA, has said that the use of aliases is common in the gambling industry. Late last month, the New York Times exposed the futile stupidity of banning online sports betting. At the same time, even conservative Switzerland now prepares to legalise online gambling. The local debate in the United States, and soon to be a wider global debate on fantasy sports, is instructive. Commissioners of the MLB, NFL and NBA say that fantasy sports is not gambling, but it needs regulation. Actually, the USA needs to be honest with itself. Call it gambling, legalise it, regulate it, and protect sports by taking all gambling on sports out of the direct and indirect grip of criminals. And we have vastly more integrity issues in sport governance than brown bags of cash, although there should be plenty of those too. At the Rugby World Cup recently conducted in England and concluded in England, Australian Rugby placed a $300,000 bet on itself. The official organisation placed a $300,000 bet on itself to win the World Cup. Allegedly, England and Ireland, maybe even more, did the same. This was done through third-party insurance companies to offset bonuses promised to players if they did win. There is something inherently wrong here. This is about values, not about business. Let's contrast this with a recent betting scandal or gambling scandal in Japan, where baseball players found betting on baseball were told it constituted a betrayal of fans to their league. So apparently players betray fans by betting on their games, but administrators don't. This is a double standard if ever I've heard one. So once again, the solution rests in the hands of governments, not in the hands of sport governing bodies. First and foremost, governments around the world need to end this senseless prohibition on sports betting and bring it out in the open so it can be licensed and regulated. Second, governments need to be far more aggressive in policing the activities of betting houses, and they need to share intelligence and information across borders so they can catch the fix before it's in. And finally, governments and law enforcement authorities need to take preemptive steps to investigate and eliminate corruption, rather than wait until the games are over and the damage is done. In short, governments need to completely rethink their approach to sport betting, and that includes redefining what sport betting is in the first place. You know, sport governing bodies and sport betting businesses may not like to hear this, but ultimately, regulations are the single best way to fight corruption and the infiltration of criminals. You see, the entire system of sport governance needs to change. Elections need to be conducted under democratic principles. Books need to be opened and audited. And sport governing bodies need to place a premium on oversight and cooperation. Here is the nub of the problem. Sport governing bodies are being squeezed by corruption from the top and cheating and fixing from the field. And fans are disenfranchised in all this. They will ultimately vote with their feet and their wallets, and some sports really will wither into obscurity as a result. Finally then, what are the big integrity questions for sport today? How can sport rebuild lost trust and decaying authenticity? How also can the emerging hunger to commercialise and segment sport integrity strategies be contained and controlled? Number one is governance. Everybody agrees that international sport governing bodies must reform to control greed, waste and fraud, or more simply, to become trusted again. The first question that must be resolved today is the actual form of the rules and regulations and the type of watchdog that must be created to hold them accountable in the future. Number 2 is doping. Everybody knows that in many sports, cheating to win by doping is endemic. Sport administrations have shown they cannot and in fact must not manage anti-doping investigations themselves, of themselves. As they are structured today, they are inherently conflicted. For instance, the IOC wants more control of WADA when in fact it should have less. How to better prevent and investigate doping in the future is a question that must be resolved today. Number 3 is fixing. Everybody knows that the corruption to lose by match fixing for betting fraud is also endemic in many sports. International sport governing bodies have neither the capacity nor the jurisdiction to control this level of criminal attack on the authenticity of competitions. How to bring international policing, betting regulators and sport administrations into a coherent, joined-up body is the third question that must be resolved today. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for sport, greed, corruption, doping and fixing, must now be seen as a collective threat and not separately. Therefore, the responses and future controls must also be collective and not separated. The task today is to solve all threats to the honesty and authenticity of sport through one joined up and sincere strategy, not necessarily designed to protect sport governance as it is, but with an absolute determination to save sport. We can save sport, but we have to stop playing games to do it. Thank you, that's me.